This
So,
conference will now be recorded.
okay. So today we're going to be looking at the new assessment plan for the Operation Departmental Manager Level 5. This came about from October last year. So we're probably looking at the next, well, from October onwards, anybody that enrolled from October last year will be on the new assessment plan. It's really radically different than the previous one. So the main changes that I can see is now that there are only 2 assessment methods involved in the new assessment plan. They've got rid of the endpoint assessment, the multiple choice questions. And you'll find that a lot now of the new assessment plans being developed have like the team leading one, that is also now got rid of the multiple choice. And they are sticking with 2 assessment methods. And the 2 assessment methods within the new assessment plan are a professional discussion, which is underpinned by a portfolio of evidence. And the biggest, I think, change is the project proposal, presentation and questioning. As you can see, one of the big differences here that the endpoint assessment will typically take 5 months. So from entering Gateway, you're talking they've got 5 months to complete their endpoint assessments. So you've got 2 assessment methods, and these can be delivered in any order. So you don't have to pass one before moving on to the next, and one assessment result from one doesn't need to be known before starting the next one. So there's no particular order that these have to be done. But of course, Gateway, in order to get that into assessment, the Gateway requirements are still the level 2 in English and Maths. What they're also asking for is a completed portfolio of evidence with something called a mapping matrix, which I will explain a little bit more later on. And what they're also looking at here, and that's the radical difference here, is they do not want the project itself, they want the proposal, and the proposal's subject, title and scope. Previously, on the Operations Departmental Manager at Gateway, they would have to submit their project. Not anymore. The project is worked upon during the endpoint assessment period, and that is why the 5-month maximum time is given. The other radical change is that all pass criteria for both assessment methods have to be achieved if the apprenticeship is to gain a pass. All distinction have to be met in order to gain a distinction. So there isn't what the weighting, there isn't the different weightings on different assessment methods, and you add them all up and you get a grade. All have to be passed. So if unfortunately if a learner misses out on one pass criteria, unfortunately that's a non-achiever. The other great thing is the assessments will be assessed holistically, but only against the criteria attached to them. In some assessment plans you may see, such as the business admin, you can holistically assess numerous assessment methods. But with this, we can only assess against the criteria that is attached to that specific assessment method. If you've looked at the new assessment plan, you will see that there are different knowledge, skills and behaviours attached to each one. It will be assessed holistically by the endpoint assessment during that assessment. So if they're doing a project presentation, it will be assessed holistically, but only against the criteria attached to them. As mentioned with the grading structure, and this is taken from the actual assessment plan, the only way a person now can get a distinction, an apprentice can get a distinction, is to get distinctions in both areas. So whether they have got distinction in the professional discussion and a pass in the project proposal, it's not a sum of adding up and then that grade will then dictate that's just a pass only. So there is only one method of getting a distinction, and that's getting distinctions in both areas. Unfortunately, if somebody actually passed their professional discussion but failed their project proposal, that will count as a fail. So if they've got a distinction in their professional discussion but failed the project proposal, it's still a fail. Because I've mentioned before, they've got to pass all the pass criteria to gain a pass, and pass all the distinction criteria to gain a distinction. The portfolio of evidence, and I'm going to go later on into what makes a good portfolio, but the portfolio of evidence, they have to compile a portfolio of evidence during the on-programme period of their apprenticeships, pretty similar as I've done before. But what they've got to be mindful of is the evidence they're going to be submitting in their portfolio will be assessed against the KSBs that are attached to that assessment method. The portfolio of evidence has to, what we say is 20 pieces of evidence. What we're looking at is that we don't want masses of pieces of evidence with very little referencing to the criteria. But what we call discrete pieces of evidence. Now, we're not saying anything over 20, we will say that's too much, but if it's 220, we would say that was too much. So what we're giving here is a sort of ballpark figure, really, to sort of help you and the learner think about what types of pieces of evidence we're going to put in. The evidence has to be clearly mapped, and a mapping annex, which I'm going to go over in a short while, against KSBs allocated. So it's like the old-fashioned paper portfolios, if you remember being around in that time, which I have been, is that you would say, and this piece of evidence, and you would say that there is knowledge 1, skill 8.1, or skill 1.2. And it's clearly referenced. So it's like at the beginning of the portfolio, you would have a mapping sheet that says where it is and what it is that you're going to be submitting within that portfolio. What type of things are going to go in the portfolio? And you've probably seen this evidence before. So it's things like workplace documentation records, of course, remembering GDPR in this, witness test statements, photographs, videos, maximum duration about 20 minutes. But what they've got to make sure is the apprentice has to be in full view and identifiable. There's not a definitive list, this, and other sources are possible, but what it should not include, and this is very important, any reflective accounts or self-assessments. In other words, when a learner is writing, they're writing exactly what they did and not a reflection on what they did. An employer, we're expecting employer contributions, and that could be in the form of maybe a direct observation of performance or witness statements, but we have to keep it to the facts and not opinionated. It should be valid, the evidence provided, and attributable to the apprentice. And it must contain that portfolio of evidence, a statement from their employer and apprentices confirming that this is their own work and how they have contributed to it. One of the documents that Summit will provide is a evidence locator for the new operations departmental manager, and this is for the portfolio submission. So as you can see on the front part of the document here, and this is still a draft document, but it will be live within the next month. This is the operations departmental manager's portfolio evidence locator, and as you can see, the declarations will be on the front of there. So that's meeting the criteria that is required for this assessment plan, that it's been authenticated and it's valid and it's reliable and it's current as well, because we're looking at the dates that they've been submitted. Within that portfolio of evidence locator, which is your mapping document, You will also have boxes similar to this, which will give you the KSB relating around the area that's going to be assessed within the portfolio of evidence and the criteria that it meets. In this comment box here, the apprentice will then describe how they've got this, where it is, and any comments. So if they've looked at their knowledge and understanding of data security and they put the comments here is during the implementation of a scheme at work, we realised that this would compromise GDPR. So this is what I did, and it can be seen on page. And then you would give us the page number. The assessor, the endpoint assessor, will look at this portfolio of evidence, but will not assess it. What they're looking for here is how they are going to extrude questions. They're going to ask that apprentice at the endpoint assessment to clarify some issues, to maybe elaborate on issues, maybe then to move them up to the distinction criteria. Really, it's getting an understanding of where the learner's coming from and what evidence they're submitting to this portfolio of evidence. The portfolio of evidence is a document that showcases the learner and what they've been going through during their apprenticeship and how they've met the KSBs attached to this. The most important thing with a mapping document and where the learner is submitting evidence is to pay attention to the action verbs. An assessor will look at the portfolio and look at the action verbs associated with that portfolio, so with that criteria, and check whether the learner has done this. So where it's asking discuss, has a discussion gone on? Is there 2 points to what the learner is submitting? Have they explained it? In other words, gone down into detail and explained? With the sort of distinction criteria, such as justifies and analyse, what we're looking for is the analytical approach and where they drill down into the good points, the bad points, the factors influencing, the factors pulling away. Justifying is using the rationale behind what they're doing with proven evidence, with research maybe. What we're trying to find here in these action verbs is you must submit evidence that you can say hand on heart that will meet those action verbs. Okay, it's very, very important that happens. Okay, any questions so far? No? Okay, move on.
Looks like we're okay for the moment, Janet.
Okay, no problem. The first assessment method I'm going to look at is the project proposal. Yeah. The project proposal approval form must be approved by us at Gateway. Now, the big difference is, and I've mentioned this before, is the operations departmental manager previously, the learner had to submit a project that they'd worked on, probably not completed, probably completed. What they're asking for now is before they go into EPA, a proposal of the project they're going to actually undertake during that EPA process will have to be approved by us at Gateway. What we're looking for in that project proposal, it should be able to demonstrate that they will provide sufficient opportunity for that apprentice to cover the knowledge, skills and behaviours mapped to that assessment method. It's a brief summary and it shouldn't be more than 500 words, and it's not going to be assessed. What we're looking for here is, will the project that apprentice will be working on during that EPA period, allow them to meet all the assessment criteria specified under that assessment plan. Now, that project proposal will be done in conjunction with their employer as well, and it's a joint agreement that it ensures that the project proposal will meet the criteria that is assigned to it, but also be some benefit to the organisation that the apprentice is working for, and benefit to the employer that they're working under. What we need to consider is also, will they be able to measure improvements or benefits to the organisation with that project proposal? The project proposal will be discussed at Gateway. The endpoint assessor will be involved in this, and they will look at the project proposal and agree it with your endpoint assessor. So once the Gateway is triggered, then Summit will then allocate an independent endpoint assessor who will then discuss with the apprentice, the training provider and the manager in relation to the project proposal that's going to be submitted. So in order to pass Gateway, that has to be agreed by all parties. The project proposal and the project is worked upon within those 12 weeks during that EPA. And the work will be carried out after the apprentice has gone through Gateway. And it involves the apprentice completing a relevant and defined piece of work that has a real business benefit. And the employer will ensure that it has real business application. I can see here the biggest issue that we're going to have is, as a training provider, which I know some of you are, that what will happen is, as they go through Gateway, a training provider then has to take a back foot. They're not in training anymore, they're in an endpoint assessment. So we are reliant on the employer supporting them, because during that time they are on their own with that employer working on this project. They have 12 weeks to get this project together, and they then have to prepare a presentation around that they will submit to Summit, and then have to give that presentation to the endpoint assessor. They have to make sure that the presentation regarding the project covers all the knowledge, skills and behaviours assigned to that assessment method. And then it will be followed by questioning by the independent assessor. The proposal that will give a detailed project implementation that will enable the project to be fully implemented. Now, the main point here, and I've had a lot of questions about that, the project does not need to be fully implemented during the EPA period. We are not expecting it to be finished within that EPA period, but the implementation of it must begin during that EPA period. And the reason they say it must begin is to ensure that skills 1.2, 2.1, 2.2 and 3.1 can be assessed, and progress against these skills will be discussed during the presentation. And these are reflecting on where it's going, how is it going, changes that need to be made. So we're not asking for the project to be fully implemented and completed during that EPA period.
Janet?
Yes?
Yeah, if I could just sort of pause you there. We've got just a quick question
No problem.
from one of the delegates. Says, will a portfolio matrix for the level 5 be available on Summit?
Yes, it will be. Yes, it will.
It will
yes.
be. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. within the handbook, as well for training providers and employers, there will also be amplification of the knowledge, skills and behaviours. So when you're saying, gosh, what can we get for this? There'll be amplification of what we're looking for within that knowledge, skills and behaviours attached to the portfolio. So yes, there will be a mapping document available.
Yeah, those of you who are not familiar with Summit EPA is our portal for endpoint assessments, and yeah, so we've just had one of our clients just sort of ask us that question for Summit. Okay, yeah, you can carry on.
Okay, no problem.
Janet, thank you.
Within the project proposal and the presentation and the following on questioning, it must include evidence of leadership support of the project. So we're asking the person, this is a level 5 qualification, what leadership support, what they've given towards that project proposal, and what has been implemented to date, which must be included as an appendix so we can be discussed during that presentation. Now, the leadership support can come from their manager, it can come from their employer, but it's somebody who is in authority above them and how they have supported them to implement, develop, start the project. Okay, and that has to be included as appendix so it can be discussed during the presentation, and it can either be an email from that person, a letter, or similar confirmation. Yeah. So what we're looking for here is that apprentice has not been left for 12 weeks with no support. We're looking at what support has been given to that apprentice and a letter or email or some form of written confirmation to say this is the type of support I've been given and this is who I am. The main part of this is the evidence provided must be valid and again attributable to the apprentice, and the project proposal must contain a statement from the employer confirming this. Okay, so within Summit we will produce a document that will be available on Summit. So when the project proposal is submitted along with the presentation to Summit, there will be a form that has to be completed both by the apprentice and the employer, confirming that this piece of work that's been submitted is valid and attributable to the apprentice. The project proposal has really, and the question has really like two assessed components. If you think about it, first of all, there's the outcome component. It's a proposal based on the post-gateway work. But once that that work has been worked upon during those 12 weeks, a presentation is then given with questioning to ensure the apprentice is assessed against the KSB's assigned to the assessment method. What we're looking for in the presentation is the learner has understood the KSB's attached to that assessment method, and the presentation is aligned to the KSB's that are being looked at by the assessor during that endpoint assessment. The questioning is often to clarify or maybe to move them to a distinction level. What we don't want the questioning to be is to actually go over the knowledge, skills and behaviours that have been missed out in that presentation, whether that was missed because of an error or they didn't go into it in great detail. What we're trying to do with that questioning is use clarification, maybe what we call mop up a little couple of bits that would then ensure that learner got a good pass and hopefully a distinction. The apprentices will conduct the project proposal, and that can be either paper-based or electronic. The project proposal may be based on any of the following. Now, the word there is may be based. That needs to be discussed with the independent endpoint assessor at Gateway, but it could be where they need to review or implement a change plan to improve efficiency in the workplace, continuous improvement and review of a current process that meets the needs of the business, need to implement a direct saving across their team department. Like I said, this list isn't exhaustive. It's not. This is the only thing you can base it on. And as you can see, the actual statements are very fluid, very open, can change. And that is the project proposal, is a discussion that has to happen at that gateway period to ensure that that project that apprentice is going to be in is what we call meaty enough to meet the KSBs, but also, as it's required on the assessment plan, some business benefit as well.
Okay, Janet, probably a good time to ask the next question here. So one of the delegates have asked, how do you propose what has been implemented so far in the project proposal, or project does not start until EPA?
Can you repeat that question again, please, Zach?
Yeah. So how do you propose what has been implemented so far in the project proposal?
Yes.
Or project does not start until EPA? So there's two parts of the question.
Yeah. Yes, the project doesn't start till after gateway, and it's during that EPA period, that 12 weeks. How much to be done is difficult to actually answer.
How do you propose what has been implemented so far?
How do I propose? Well, what we are saying is, what we are looking at is that the KSBs attributed to this assessment method have some form of evidence.
Okay.
Because that is what they're being assessed on. If you look at the evidence that's attached to this method, to this assessment method, that's what we're assessing. It's got to be attributable to this. Now, the project proposal could talk about, in 2 years, this is what we're hoping to see. And if you're talking about data analysis, what we can be showing is we would look for this and this data in 2 years' time to show that that has an improvement on the project I'm doing has an improvement on this, this, and this. That is showing that project is a long-term project. We're not expecting a project to be done. Some projects can be done in 12 weeks, but often a long-term project is what they can use towards their KSBs is projected, what they're looking for. I'll explain a little bit more in detail. It might come in my next slide after this one, what that project proposal has to contain, and then that might show you how it can be met without the project being completely finished.
Okay.
The proposal. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. Just wanted to move on to the next question. Janet. What happens if business demands need the project to start before gateway?
No, we could not submit that. No, it's got to be started after gateway.
Yeah, that's the requirement of the assessment plan.
It's actually requirement assessment plan. It is.
Okay. And just one final one. The language is very confusing. Can Janet please confirm that the proposal includes the business case, the initial plan, and a review of progress to date?
Yes. The project proposal at the beginning is a 500-word document. Yeah. 500-word document is giving us the endpoint assessor an idea of what the project's going to be about. So it's about the scope, what it intends to do, timeframes involved, that type. It's just a synopsis of what that project is going to be about. I'll move on to the next slide. It might help a little bit. The actual proposal that they submit after the 12 weeks must contain this.
Yeah.
Okay. An executive summary, an introduction. Now, this is the written document that has to be completed alongside the presentation associated with this. So you're looking at the scope, what the objectives are, a plan. Now, they may put in a Gantt chart that's moving on to 2025. What we're looking at here is, do they understand project planning? That's what we're looking at here. Have they come into the mitigating risk that are involved? Whose responsibility? How are they going to measure success? how the project outcomes will be achieved. Yeah. Have they considered budgeting and resourcing? Have they looked about alternatives that they might be used or could have been used? We're not asking here for the project to be completed. What we're asking for here, and the assessment plan is asking for, is the learner in their proposal meeting all these areas. Yeah, and that might be, they're working on it now, this is what we've got to consider when they've, within about 6 months or 12 months. It is the scope of the project that might be a 6-week project, or it could be a 6-year project, but it's not asking to be complete. Any more questions, Zach? I can't hear you, Zach, you must be on mute. Zach, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. No, not at this stage. Just a correction there. The 500 words is the scope of the project.
Yeah,
and not the project set, so it's 4,000 words for the proposal.
The proposal is 4,000 words.
Yeah, and then next question is this a proposal written before action is taken, i.e. the recommendations
Well, probably,
and
yes.
conclusions summarise what is to be done?
Yeah, the thing is, depending on the project itself, yeah, the recommendations and conclusions might come from a small part of the project that's already been implemented. It doesn't have to be the recommendations and conclusions the whole project, but it's the recommendations and conclusions they've come to so far within the project, or what they think the conclusions may be. What recommendations would they think about if they had to start it again? Would it be different? Would it be having to look at different areas? People have asked me, would it be better if they just did a project within that 12-week period? So we will ensure that they've got everything and it's finished. You can do that, but it's whether it meets the KSBs attached to it in enough detail. Because this has not been tried before, nobody in the country has actually implemented this yet to date. And it is, I can consider that most people and most apprentices would look at completing a project within a 12-week period, because leaving a project unfinished and then doing a presentation feels as though they haven't got the ending to go into, and it might be struggle to come up with the recommendations and conclusions from that. But the recommendations and conclusions can come from any part of the project, because what they want to see is the implementation of that project. They've wrote the 500 words again, this is what I'm going to do. And within that 3-month period, we're expecting some of these to be touched upon, depending on the detail, where they are at the specific time. I can see another question come up, Zach.
Yeah. So this one's from Alex Austin, is asking the brief of 500 words, proposal 4,000 words. Brief, I would like to do something the business benefit is something. So I think that's a title. Proposal, exactly how this will be done, resources needed, Gantt charts, project plans, how KSBs are met, etc., and make a start on implementation.
So in summary, that's basically what Janet is saying, I think. We have a 500-word brief, 4,000-word proposal. The brief is, this is what I want to do, and this is what the benefit is. And the proposal is exactly how we're going to do it, what resources we need, Gantt charts, etc. And we need to make a start on implementation. That, in essence, is it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes. We're not expecting to finish it, but what we're expecting you is that 500-word proposal right at the beginning, like, this is what I'm going to do. We agree to that, what you're going to do. And then that 12 weeks of putting together this evidence that's required for this. Does that make sense, Alex?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Now, it is going to be over 4,000 words. Okay, so we have to include a word count within that. And what we also are requiring is an annex showing how the project proposal maps to the KSBs that have to be assessed against this method. And again, we will be providing you a project proposal mapping matrix, and it'll be very similar. What page is that on? What evidence you're submitting to meet that KSB? Okay. Because what happens with this, the assessor will review the project proposal and holistically together with the presentation and the questioning. I know it sounds obvious, but the person should, the apprentice should complete their project proposal unaided, and when it's submitted, they have to then the apprentice and the employer have to verify that the submitted project proposal, and then this work, the proposal is the apprentice's own work. In order for that proposal, what we are hoping to see is, like I said, some implementation of that, because we will wonder what is that person been doing sat in EPA for 12 weeks, apart from writing a 400 word document. That's never going to happen. We need to see evidence of that happening, because we're assessing not just the person's knowledge, but the skills and the behaviours attributed to those as well. So how do you demonstrate skills is actually doing things.
Okay, another question from, another question from Michelle. What happens if you don't agree with their project proposal, i.e. if you don't think it's going to meet the KSBs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why it's got to be agreed at Gateway. Thanks, Shell. What it actually is, if you don't agree with it, of course, you've got to give your rationale as an independent assessor. You would also speak to the quality manager as well, and the justifications of why, and you would discuss that first with the employer and the apprentice. If you can show where it's not going to meet the KSBs or how they're going to meet it, and you're not happy with that decision, you would say, I do not think that's a sound business benefit, not enough to actually meet the KSBs. And then they should go back and think about what they're actually going to change their project proposal. That's beginning brief, so it encompasses everything. It is in the independent assessment right to actually refuse and say, we don't agree with that, it's not going to meet it, because we're not setting up to fail, we're actually encouraging, we're ensuring that the project proposal will meet the KSBs. And I think it's that joint discussion, and I think go away and have a think about how you would do this. And I think that's for the training provider is very important as well, before they get to Gateway, is to start thinking about it. What are they thinking of doing during that Gateway period? Not starting work on it, but thinking about what are they hoping to do? What are they hoping to achieve? And have that already. Now, there's nothing wrong with contacting Summit, which we're quite happy to do and discuss that with you, with myself, the quality manager, to discuss the project. If you think that's not enough or not too little, I'm not saying we'd answer everybody's question, because we might be inundated, but what we're trying to get here is consideration of the substance that needs to go in the 4,000 word project, and would that topic or area that they're going to actually propose and implementing be sufficient to do that. And I think an independent assessor such as yourself, Shell, would explain, you're going to struggle with this area and you're going to struggle with this area. Does that answer your question, Shell?
Yeah, it answers it. Thank you.
No problem. Okay. Apart from the project proposal, the 4,000 word and the presentation, the questioning after the presentation from the independent endpoint assessor will be used to seek clarification. And what we're looking at here is assessing the depth and breadth of the knowledge, skills and behaviours. Yeah. If they didn't able to, or they weren't able to demonstrate during the proposal, some of the KSBs. The presentation should be submitted at the same time as the project proposal. Okay, so within them 12 weeks, the project proposal and presentation will be submitted to Summit. From that date of submission, the independent assessor will have 2 weeks to review the proposal prior to the presentation. Okay. The reason for that is an endpoint assessor will look at the depth and breadth of the presentation and the proposal itself, and then tailor the questioning to meet KSBs that need clarification, developing, or enhancing. The fortunate thing with Summit is once the apprentice uploads their project proposal to Summit along with their presentation, we are notified automatically, but it's also useful for an email to say, well, I have submitted my project proposal presentation. And the reason why we need acknowledgement, if there's any technical requirements for the presentation, such as they need access to IT, they need access to good internet, blah, blah, anything around that. What the presentation contains are these areas. This is taken from their project proposal, and they've done a 4,000 word brief, and their presentation should include these areas. So operational management, what business tools did they use? How did they identify and overcome barriers? Project management tools to plan. So that's use of Gantt charts, rating. Finance, monitoring budgets, leading people, relationships, building communication skills. So the presentation contents are defined within the assessment plan, and this presentation relates to the project proposal. The question after the presentation will consist of a minimum of 8 questions. At the end of the presentation, with 1 question from each of the bullet points listed previous. So there will be a minimum of 8 questions, and those questions will be based on, we have to ask from each area. So as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 9, but we have to ask a minimum of 8. So you would bet your bet on dollar that it's probably 9 questions, but we have to ask 1 from each area. And the reasons we do questioning is to seek some clarification and again to assess the depth and breadth. That is why that 2-week period is required before after submission, and then the endpoint assessment taking place regarding the presentation. So the assessor can get a feel and a taste and look at some questions that they're going to ask for clarification. The assessor can also use their own questions once the minimum has been achieved for clarification as well. So there is scope within this assessment plan for the assessor to use their own questioning once the minimum number of questions have been asked in relation to the assessment. Okay. Any questions on the project so far? My personal thoughts are that this has not been tried and tested yet. Nobody in the country has done this. And I think some developmental understanding will come once this has been implemented, and the Trailblazers and Ofqual will be looking at it in a bit more detail to see if there is any issues strengths and weaknesses. Okay. Any questions?
Just a question. Yeah, just a question here. Are presentations undertaken remotely, Janet?
Yes, yes, they can be. Yeah, yes, they can be. Yeah.
So it's just like currently with the old assessment plan for ODM.
Yeah.
You sort of set up a session similar to this, and the assessors will just do everything remotely. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Any more questions there?
Not for the moment. Not for the moment. Yeah, it seems
Okay,
on.
no problem.
Thanks. Thank you.
The next assessment method, so once the learner's gone through Gateway, will be the professional discussion. Now, the professional discussion is underpinned by a portfolio of evidence, and this is some of the time frames that we have to be aware of during that portfolio of evidence and that professional discussion. As mentioned previously, the portfolio and mapping matrix, which we've discussed previously, will be submitted at Gateway. So that's the 20 pieces of discrete evidence, the mapping matrix that we will supply to you that will say content, where it is, and the authenticity. Now, once they've entered Gateway, they have got a period of 5 months to complete the endpoint assessment. Apprentices will be given 2 weeks notice ahead of their professional discussion. Now, my wondering is, and I'd like some sort of like feedback on this, if they have got a 5-month period that the endpoint assessment can be achieved, do you think apprentices would want the professional discussion with a portfolio of evidence within 2 weeks or within 3 weeks of going through Gateway, and after 12 weeks, then carry out the presentation of the project proposal with questioning? What are your thoughts on this? Anybody thoughts about this? Yes, the faster the better. I don't know how this would work, to tell you the truth. If apprentices given 2 weeks notice ahead of their PD, does this mean they will be booking this in, or do we have to still organise? No, you could book that in straight after they've gone through Gateway. You could actually say, right, in 3 weeks' time, because we said 2 weeks notice ahead of the professional discussion. Yeah, I think they should focus on the PD, then focus on the project presentation. That's fine. I mean, that's totally up to you. I thought, are we leaving apprentices too long for the professional discussion with the portfolio evidence to take place? And I agree with you that some people just get it over and done with. So after 3 weeks of going through Gateway, get it over and done with. Yeah. Okay. The professional discussion will last an hour, and the assessor will ask a minimum. Again, this is we stipulated this by the assessment plan of 6 questions. And then again, it's followed up by any questions from the independent assessor, their own questioning that used for clarification, and that will allow maybe the apprentice to get up to distinction level, or, you know, if they're really struggling, to cover the KSBs for the pass level. So, what makes a good portfolio? I've covered this in a previous webinar, but so I do apologise if some of you have seen this before. I've added a little bit more to this of what we consider as a good portfolio. I've thrown this up again. Now, this is the reason why I've thrown it up, is because a good portfolio should take into consideration extremely the action verbs associated with it. So the KSBs attached to the portfolio of evidence, please, please, please read and read again, because we are looking, does it fully meet what the action verbs are asking? Has the learner in their portfolio explained or justified? Yeah. What evidence have they got to show for that? Have they evaluated, looked at both sides? Yeah. Be very, very, very careful. Make sure that the action verbs are met with the KSBs for the portfolio of evidence. With the portfolio of evidence, and use of names and sensitive data, again, be very careful of that, not to include. The use of holistic evidence that maybe cover one or more criteria. If it's attributable, if the criteria is within the KSBs being assessed to the portfolio of evidence and using one piece of evidence to cover more, it's got to be really stand out. This is where it needs it. Some of the behaviours will be in where the skills are, because often demonstrate the skill, a behaviour is also demonstrated. So I think the use of holistic evidence is useful when you're trying to identify behaviours. We also recommend that before the portfolio is submitted to Gateway, that an IQA or a colleague checks it out. Often 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Okay. It's not a requirement, but we feel it's often a fresh pair of eyes looking at it. You know, is it obvious to that person? Can they find everything? Do they know where it is? What that means. The discrete pieces of evidence we've said before is a recommendation of 20, though that is not a stipulation. You know, you will not get a fail because they've submitted 30. But what we're saying here is the quantity versus quality. Okay. Submitting numerous charts, spreadsheets, you know, if it's not going to meet the KSBs, why put it in? It's not going to, if it's backing something up, maybe only 1 or 2. But what we're looking for is that evidence has to be attributable to that KSBs. So it's easy for it to be easily checked, easily awarded to that person. Yeah, I can see it there. That's great. Just maybe need to ask a question on what we would have done A, B, and C. As Pete said before, to make sure that the evidence they submit in their portfolio of evidence exactly matches the criteria. One of the biggest tips we give, and I know it sounds obvious, but involve the apprentice in the development of their portfolio. Sometimes I've seen the portfolios put together for the learner. Okay, so the training provider and the employer will put together, this is a good piece, this is a good piece. Not involving the apprentice that much. And when it comes to questioning them, the apprentice doesn't know the contents of their own portfolio. Now that sounds as though, what's, you know, but it does happen. It does happen. The KSBs we're looking for have to be demonstrated in the work environment, real examples. You cannot use hypothetical, they've got to be real work examples, because that's what the portfolio evidence is showcasing, the learning of the knowledge, skills and behaviours that's happened during that apprenticeship. Within the portfolio evidence, we want also what we call clean documents. So we don't want work that's being assessed by tutors or assessors, without QA. They've got to be clean pieces of evidence with no comments or feedback on these as well. They've got to be what called clean documents. Okay. In the submission of evidence, again, if you're trying to submit evidence to show that the learner knows something, asking a question is very one-dimensional. Understanding knowledge can be demonstrated either by answering a question to it, but then it's application we're looking for, the application of that knowledge within the workplace and how it's influenced their behaviour and how it's influenced their skills. With their professional discussion, or if they've had a professional discussion or they've got taped evidence, audio evidence, it has to be clear and concise. I've listened to some recordings and I can hardly hear the learner at all. They've got to state their name, they happen to be recorded, They have to have timings on them. So if you're saying that K8.2 is being met by this recording, tell me you've got to stipulate on the mapping sheet the time where it is on that recording and the date this was happened and the consent for that recording to take place. Can you ensure that all the evidence that's been submitted is valid, reliable, current, authentic and sufficient? Again, the currency of it, we don't, something that's happened 3 years ago is not during that learner's apprenticeship. What we're looking for is work that's been carried out during that learner's apprenticeship, because what we're trying to do is demonstrate and showcase their learning and understanding of their apprenticeship. Within our support documents for the centres, we will have guidance for the criteria and amplification of these as well. So what we're actually, key words that we're looking for, key pieces of evidence that could be attributable. We're not saying that the amplification is, this is what you have to provide. It is a guide for you that can be provided. And that will be in our toolkits with the summit in relation to the new operations departmental manager. They will be both for the apprentice and the employer and training provider.
Just a couple of more questions here, Janet. Alex is asking if the consent is mandatory.
It is. Consent must be given when we're doing actual recordings for anybody. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, that's sort of it for questions.
Yeah. Okay. More hints and tips. As mentioned before, the apprentice should know. Zach, can you go on mute, please? Thank you. The apprentice should know their portfolio inside out. The evidence should be easy to locate, and that will help with your referencing, your mapping reference. Now, people say, well, I've got a bit of criteria on one page and a bit of criteria on the other. Can we have part met? Yes, you can have part met. We don't want the part met all the way through. We would like to see full criteria met. But there's nothing wrong with part met evidence as long as it's referenced. So you say, well, there's a bit of K2.1 there and a bit there as well. Yeah, so we can see it. That's fine. Witness testimonies. Again, it's like the old witness testimonies we could choose for a portfolio. It's the who can give a good witness testimony, what format they take, the authenticity and sufficiency. I'm not going to say how you complete witness testimonies because I think all of us are aware how a good witness testimony should look. Annotate evidence, things like timings on recording, annotate pieces of work, written work, to say, well, that, and often that will be in the margin side, that's K1.1, that's a bit of K.2, and then the mapping sheet at the front will say on page 1 is K1.1, S2.1. So we need to annotate the evidence and timings on recording with annotations as well. And the last point is detail, 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 and more detail. The more detail you put in, the easier it is then to attribute it to the KSB, assigned to that. We don't assess the portfolio as part of the endpoint assessment, but it is used to guide the endpoint assessor into the questioning they will use during that session. If a portfolio came in and it's got little detail in it, doesn't show fully that it meets the criteria, that questioning then time will be taken up in just mopping up, make sure that the learner achieves a pass. Where if there's detail that really showcases that they've met that pass criteria, striving towards that distinction criteria, or even you've met the criteria, that questioning then could be used to enrich and detail a little bit more, to give it that little bit push more to get another criteria that may be a little bit more justification, a little more analytical to get that distinction criteria. And last but not least, I like to show, know, apply and display. So with their portfolio, the apprentice needs to show throughout the portfolio they know the knowledge, apply correctly the skill, and display the behaviour doing it. So that's your KSBs. So if you use the show, know, apply, display and check the evidence is submitted, it's quite a useful tool. Any questions? All gone quiet.
I think some good questions were asked during the duration of the webinar.
Yeah, I've got some. Yeah. Like we're sending a copy of the slides after the presentation. I know Vaxat will do that.
And the recording, yeah. So I will send you a link. I will send you a link out of the recording, which will be on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days, certainly by the end of the week. Yeah, I think we can wrap up now. I think we've gone over our allocated time. Don't think anyone's got any questions. I hope you've all found it very helpful. And yeah, like I said, I'll be sending out the slides in the next few days. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah, speak to you all soon. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.